We live in a world plagued by one-dimensional thinking, a world where it's common to reduce a person to one factor, their test score, their race, what's in their bank account, or a complex phenomenon such as inflation is reduced to one simple cause. We think one-dimensionally because it's easier and faster to think about one variable than several. But what if multidimensional thinking could be just as easy? This is where vectors come in. Vectors are the dominant tool for multidimensional thinking. Many procedures that work on a single variable also work on vectors. This accounts for vectors' popularity in geometry, statistics, physics, and even the social sciences. More than that, they are the pathway to all advanced mathematics. Still, one place where vectors aren't receiving due credit is high school. Despite being in the Common Core, vectors are treated as a side topic in many textbooks. I believe this is a mistake and that vectors deserve more emphasis, both to help students with multidimensional problems in high school and to promote multidimensional thinking more broadly. A perfect example is trigonometry. I propose a study to answer the following question. How would a curriculum that connects linear algebra and trigonometry impact students' proficiency in trigonometry, namely their conceptual understanding and procedural fluency? To answer that question, let's look at the literature on why students struggle with trigonometry. Trigonometry is a multidimensional area. You have 3, sometimes 4 quantities changing simultaneously: the angle, cosine, sine, and tangent. Variational reasoning means thinking about a quantity changing continuously as opposed to in chunks. Covariational reasoning means thinking about 2 or more quantities changing continuously and how they relate to each other as they do. Both variational and covariational reasoning, the understanding of movement, help students understand trigonometry. The way students usually learn trigonometry, however, lacks this notion of movement. Instead, students first learn trig for static triangles, then they unlearn that and learn about the unit circle. The concept of angle is barely examined in either case. Many students think that trig ratios depend on triangles, not angles. Angles come from circles and the lengths of arcs, yet we often ask students to work with angles without that conceptual foundation. Here's a framework well established in math education, the 5 strands of mathematical proficiency, which together describe, guess what, mathematical proficiency. The strands reinforce each other. For example, conceptual understanding helps students remember procedures. To guide the design of a curriculum, I borrowed from a few theories, including DNR-based mathematics education. The N stands for necessity. The idea is that students must have an intellectual need for a concept before they can learn it. Curriculum can go a long way towards providing motivations for concepts. For example, to motivate vectors, students might explore problems involving motion in 2 dimensions first. The R in DNR-based instruction stands for repeated reasoning. Students must receive opportunities to practice reasoning, not as a drill to memorize it, but to grasp the pattern in its structure. As a student looks at this drawing, for example, they might notice that consecutive numbers are being added to create each triangular number. Every new curriculum requires professional development so that teachers know how to teach it. Mathematics teaching expertise is a theory of teacher knowledge that sorts it into 3 main buckets: content knowledge, i.e. knowing math, pedagogical content knowledge, knowing how to teach math, and content-specific noticing skills, noticing stuff in the classroom relevant to teaching math. There are parts of these theories that I excluded as well. According to DNR, mathematics is defined by institutionally accepted knowledge. I didn't like that definition because it devalued students' knowledge. So, informed by Yasso's theory of community cultural wealth, I rejected this definition. With careful adjustments like that, we can create a perfect theoretical mix to answer my research question. Now let's talk methods. Because this is a new idea, we need to show it can be done before we gauge effectiveness. I chose a methodology called design-based research, in which the researcher acts like a designer or engineer, testing an intervention in context and tweaking it in real time based on stakeholder feedback. The plan is simple. I would create a 6-week lesson sequence that teaches vectors, then trigonometry based on the vectors. I would find 2 teachers at urban intensive schools to try out this sequence in their integrated Math 3 or pre-calculus classes, and I'd collect a mixture of classroom observation notes, teacher interviews, and student work. Nothing is perfect the first time. Design-based research would allow me to iteratively improve my design as I collect more data. I would run 4 iterations of the 6-week lesson sequence over 2 years with data-informed changes in between. The data I'd collect would be a mix of qualitative and quantitative, falling into 3 main buckets: climate data, including engagement and lesson pacing; learning data, including pre- and post-tests as well as formative assessments on vectors and trig; and systemic data, including implementation details, ease of adoption, and costs. If this project is successful, it would show that creating a more coherent math curriculum is possible. I'll tell you a dirty secret. The Common Core architects admit the high school math standards were an afterthought. Many ideas within the high school curriculum, including the traditional trigonometry sequence, are contradictory or incompatible, leading to confusion for students. Under a vector regime, unit circle trigonometry would no longer be an isolated topic area. Instead, it would be a particular application of a more general, multidimensional way of thinking, a way of thinking that would continue serving students in physics, calculus, linear algebra, and beyond. It's also worth returning to the speech I gave at the beginning. Multidimensional thinking is inherently valuable for the next generation of citizens. We want to live in a society where people understand that one event can have multiple causes, or that one action can have multiple effects. The most pressing issues are too complex to be seen one-dimensionally. To be clear, I would be happy if this intervention showed promise. The next step would be an efficacy study to see if it boosts outcomes in ideal circumstances. But even if this specific intervention doesn't pan out, it's worth having an honest conversation about which ideas in our high school math curriculum serve our students. In a world full of one-dimensional messages, I think there's a strong argument that the multidimensionality of vectors should be one of them.